I have some bad news to you. I will be talking about Christianity and the Middle Ages. So you're not supposed to have fun. You're not supposed to experience any pleasure. If you do, you have to feel very, very guilty because, as we all well know, Christianity is a very gloomy worldview. But becoming serious, at least to a certain extent, David mentioned Socrates, who was tried for impiety and for corrupting the youth, and he was executed in 399 BC. And he became a model of virtue for not only the Greeks but then the Romans. So he was considered to someone like the greatest saint, quote unquote, of the Greek philosophy. And a very interesting thing that Socrates says, according to both Xenophon and Plato, who were his disciples, and they both of them wrote apologies. So they try to depict Socrates before his judges. So both of them agree that Socrates said before the court that he has never done anything wrong in his entire life. He was completely blameless. No wonder the judges didn't like it, and they punished him with death for that. But Saint Augustine of Hippo, with him I want to start, one of the towering figures of the Christian tradition. He became the most vocal representative of a completely contrary view. So he used Socrates to attack him and to undermine the classical Greek and Roman view of virtue. Because Augustine believed that the human nature is so wounded by sin, by the sin of Adam, that it's impossible for anyone to become morally perfect, and it's impossible to anyone to say, like Socrates, I have never done anything wrong in my entire life. And of course, this influenced not only the entire Middle Ages, but Martin Luther and the reformers. But we can see that also in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, for instance. If you remember that no one there is, except one person, no one there is able to even touch the One Ring, because they are afraid that if they do, they will not resist its evil temptation. So this conveys the meaning that no one is morally safe. We just can't be perfect because we are human. So Augustine developed this to extremes, especially during his polemics with Pelagianism towards the end of his life. Pelagius was a British monk, probably from Ireland, since Saint Jerome, in his peculiar style, says that Pelagius was very stupid due to his being stuffed with Irish porridge, scotorum pultibus pregravatus. I don't have a strong opinion on that, but Pelagius certainly taught that we can become perfect, morally perfect as Christians. We need some help from God, but basically Christianity is this ascetic, philosophical way of perfecting ourselves and developing morally. Augustine believed that undermines the entire Christian religion, so he attacked this very strongly, and he came up with his famous doctrine of peccatum originale, which means the original sin. The original sin is not a sin. It's not the sin of Adam, the first sin. Original sin is a kind of illness, spiritual sickness that is transmitted sexually, according to Augustine, and we all suffer from that. And original sin is this spiritual weakness that makes it impossible for us to become fully morally virtuous. So Augustine believed that Socrates, when he says, I have never done anything wrong, he is wrong, but he's also sinning precisely at the moment that he says that. And Augustine introduced the virtue of humility, as well as other Christian authors. Humility wasn't a virtue in the classical period, but in Christianity it becomes central, and the worst sin becomes pride, which is the exact opposite. But humility is not self-deprecation. Humility is realism for Augustine. He says that humility if humans know themselves to be humans, basically. So it's the acceptance of our reality. And Augustine famously said, he didn't say that, but the Middle Ages believed that he said that the virtues of Greek and Roman sages were in fact vitia splendida, splendid vices, because the narcissism of the Greco-Roman culture, it spoiled even the glorious examples of people like Socrates or Marcus Aurelius, because they were virtuous for themselves. They wanted to be perfect, and we cannot desire to be perfect if we want to be morally perfect. That's a great paradox. So this is the one thing that Augustine introduces into the Christian tradition. The second thing is, and he takes this from Plotinus, 3rd century AD Platonist philosopher, that we are basically relational creatures. Our being is radically open to others and to God. So for Plotinus, the fall of the soul and the sin is really closing up and making our self this little world for itself, while happiness is based on being open to reality. And Augustine, of course, takes that eagerly because it's in harmony with Christianity, and he identifies virtue with love, in particular with the love of God, but also with love for each other. And Augustine believes that our love for each other cannot compete with our love for God, because God is the love with which we love each other, if we love each other properly. So the British philosopher and novelist Iris Murdoch pointed out that this perfectly autonomous, independent, self-realized individual of modern liberalism and the Enlightenment had been given a name already in the 17th century. The name is Lucifer, and John Milton in his Paradise Lost pointed that out, and he was greatly influenced by Augustine. C.S. Lewis shows that in his beautiful preface to Paradise Lost, 1943. So for Augustine, love is ordo virtutum, the order of virtues. So love is what brings harmony into those four virtues that David mentioned, the traditional four Platonic virtues, which for Augustine are a form of love, while vices and sins are a form of separation from God and from others. But the most popular classification of sins or vices in the Middle Ages, it doesn't come from Augustine, but from a Greek philosopher and monk of the 4th century, Evagrius Ponticus, who writes in his works about 8 logismoi, 8 thoughts, and this idea of those 8 thoughts was transmitted to the Latin West by St. John Cassian, and then at the beginning of the 7th century, Pope St. Gregory the Great, he gave a list of 7, which is derived from those 8 thoughts of Evagrius and Cassian. So St. Gregory the Great says that pride is the root of all evil, and from this root 7 principal vices spring: vainglory, envy, anger, melancholy, avarice, gluttony, and lust. He calls them not sins, but vices, principalia vitia, principal vices. And the difference is that vice, as David said, vice is an inner disposition, characterological disposition, while sin is something we do, it's an act. So there is a huge difference. And this tradition of the 7 deadly sins, as they were called in the Middle Ages, we can see that in another great figure of the Middle Ages, St. Thomas Aquinas. He took Augustine for his authority, but he was much more emphasizing rationality, and he didn't believe that we are so deeply wounded by sin as Augustine believed. So he's much more optimistic. He also knew Aristotle better than Augustine because he had access to Latin translations of Aristotle's ethical works. But Thomas Aquinas defines sin following Augustine. Sin is something contrary to the eternal law. But we have to remember that Aquinas defines law in a very strange way for us. He says that law is just reason. Law is reason applied in practice for the common good. So he says sin is basically something irrational and stupid. We are acting against reason, and reason is not just our faculty, it's something inherent in reality itself, because God is reason and the world is the image of God, so the world is rational and intelligible. So it's always, you can hear about the Middle Ages, various legends which are funny to those who know anything about the Middle Ages. So for instance, that the most important thing was chastity, and sexual sins were considered the gravest in the Middle Ages. That medieval Christians were obsessed with sex. I believe that the 19th century scholars may have been obsessed by sex, and they were studying the Middle Ages from that perspective. There is a very simple way to get rid of those legends, which I strongly recommend, although it seems challenging to some. The method requires buying a book written in the Middle Ages, it could be in translation, opening this book, trying to read it. I find it very enlightening. And if we apply this method to Dante, with whom I will close this paper, Dante takes the tradition of the 7 deadly sins into his Divine Comedy, the beginning of the 14th century, and he describes Purgatory as a mountain consisting of 7 terraces. And the souls in Purgatory are already saved, but they have to cleanse themselves from the worldly attachments, and they go to the top of the mountain where the earthly paradise from which Adam and Eve were banished still is. And if you see the hierarchy, it's exactly the hierarchy of this tradition. And lust is the least grave of all sins. It's very near to the paradise at the top. But the worst sin is pride. And there is a simple reason for it, because Satan is the worst sinner. And what Satan doesn't understand sex, and he's not capable of sinning sexually. So sexual sins cannot be the worst ones. That's fairly rational. And also in the first circle of hell, we have a limbo where virtuous pagan sages can be found. But then in the second circle of hell, Dante meets those who committed sins connected to lust. And he said, but he calls them those who departed from our life because of love. So lust is the least grave of sins because it's connected to love and to relationships, while pride is this cold self-isolation. At the very bottom of hell, we have Lucifer, who is cold as ice. There is no love in him and no relationality, and he has 3 mouths, and in every mouth he has 3 greatest sinners, which is Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. Those 2 killed Julius Caesar, and Judas obviously betrayed Jesus. So for Dante, the worst sin is to repay good with evil. And he reminds us of something which we apparently forgotten entirely, that life without gratitude is hell. That's Dante's position. So to conclude, from Augustine to Dante, virtue is not about following some arbitrary set of rules set by God because he doesn't want us to have fun. It's about being open to others, to our fellow humans, and to God, who is the source of beauty, goodness, and truth. However, at the same time, it's not some hippie ideal of being warm and fuzzy to strangers on the bus. No, for the medieval people, the world is intelligible and rational, rationally ordered, beautiful and harmonious, because it's an image of God who is both love and reason. And that is why everything is connected with everything else and dependent on everything else. And the all and the whole is very good, and because it participates in the supreme good, who is God. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for adding this perspective. There seems to be a fundamental difference regarding virtue between antiquity and the Middle Ages. I mean, in antiquity, you started as a good person aiming to be better, finding happiness. And in the Middle Ages, you started out as a sinner with all the odds against you, and at best you could be a little more free from sin. But did happiness, did the concept of eudaimonia exist in the Middle Ages?
Well, of course. I wouldn't stress the difference that much. It depends on philosophical schools. For instance, Platonists believed that in something called the fall of the soul. So they believed that there was some primal sin which we committed, and we live in this life as a sort of a punishment, corrective punishment. So they didn't believe that we start as good people striving for happiness. And also Aristotle says that the majority of people live as cattle. It's not very appreciative, of course, so they were very elitist. So the difference between Christianity and classical antiquity is that Christianity is not elitist. It wants to open virtue and happiness to all, even the uneducated, while the Greeks were focused on what the elites do. But I wouldn't say that there is this break with the tradition. Happiness is key in Augustine. Augustine says everyone desires happiness. God is true happiness. So we can become happy only if we possess God. But in order to possess God, we have to follow the commandments, which are just a rational way of living your life. So I would see continuity, although I show that there are some emphases made in the Middle Ages which are not there in the classical antiquity.
But the Greeks said, strive for excellence, try to be outstanding. And the Middle Ages preached humility. Don't believe that you are anything. You're just a lousy sinner in this world.
Yeah, well, I would call it realism. I mean, what Augustine says, we have to know ourselves for what we are. And the difference may be that we shouldn't try to make ourselves excellent. We should focus on God who is excellent. And by participating in God almost unconsciously, we become excellent like God. We become similar to God. But if we focus on ourselves, then it's over. And sin is exactly this excessive focus on ourself.
What would be the answer if I asked a Christian, if we are God's image, why are we not perfect from the very beginning of our lives?
Well, we have to ask Adam and Eve about that. And there was a snake as well. So we are created as images of God, as kings of the earth, as we are almost like the angels. But then we rejected all of that. So that's what the Middle Ages, they were trying to understand. How could we do that? So we were given everything, and we just said, well, I don't want everything. I just want this one apple. And
next question, why hasn't God corrected us then? Why has he accepted sin? No.
Because he values freedom. Yeah.
So thank you, Mateusz. This far.